Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and welcome to a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I call this episode the Robinson Family UFO Siege. This is not their real name, they prefer to remain anonymous, and the Robinson family consists of the mother, the father, and two daughters. And what I like about this case is that it illustrates how a UFO case can develop from beginning to end. It also illustrates one of the main ET agendas, the Greys, and it also shows how a case can start out very frightening but evolve into something that's more benevolent. So that's why I wanted to present this case to you today. And this case starts in 1975 when the Robinson family decided to go to the San Bernardino National Forest for a weekend away from the city. They rented a couple of cabins and were enjoying themselves, and then late that evening a UFO showed up. It was the mother, Diane Robinson, who noticed it first. She looked out the window and saw this glowing object, and it had lights on it, and it was darting around in these weird angles, and it was immediately obvious to her that this was a UFO. As she says, it was erratic movement. You could see it moving in the sky. It would hover, and then it would just go shoom, shoom, shoom. I mean, stars, don't go all over the place, and helicopters don't go all over the place. They don't go quickly from one side to another and then shoot up and then come down at an angle and do that so fast, like faster than sound movement. Diane describes this object as, quote, bright. It had a lot of bright lights on it. It was round-like. It was like that, and it was in the distance. Kind of disappeared into nowhere, into the night blackness. It just left, zap, and it was gone. As fast as we saw it, it was gone. Diane, of course, was not the only witness. Her daughters saw it as well. And I will let the youngest daughter, Kelly, describe it. At the time, she was just a pre-teenager. And as Kelly says, that one was with my sister, my cousin, and I. We thought we saw a UFO. It was jumping up and down, a bright light kind of jumping, back and forth. We just thought it was a UFO because it was moving in different patterns, not like a plane. So this was a quick, simple sighting, and off it went. It was very brief, and they thought that would be it, the extent of their experiences. But it wasn't. It was about 7 years later that they had another sighting. This second sighting actually was just Kelly and her friends, Kelly, the youngest daughter. This occurred in 1982. Kelly had gone to the town of Julian. This is located in Southern California in San Diego County. And she had gone to a church camp out in the Vulcan Mountains. It's quite isolated there. And she was one evening laying out on these benches with her friends looking up at the night sky when these UFOs showed up. These were star-like objects darting at right angles, and it was immediately obvious to Kelly and her friends that this was not a plane, satellites, helicopter, or anything like that. As she says, this was up in the mountains by San Diego. A bunch of us saw it. It's an outdoor church where you can go outside, and they have benches and everything, and we were just lying down and talking and looking up at the sky, and all of a sudden we saw it, and we all got scared. It was like jumping back and forth like aircraft, but going super fast, going back and forth. The only reason we didn't think it was a plane, because we saw it zigzagging and moving back and forth so fast. We just basically chickened out and went back to where we had to sleep. We went back and we were all scared. We didn't talk about it. So that's not unusual for witnesses not to talk about a sighting. But this is definitely a clue that there might be deeper levels of contact. And again, Kelly thought that would be the extent of it, but she would return to this same church camp in Julian over the next few years. and she saw the UFOs again. It sort of became a pastime for her and her friends to do. Go out late at night and see if there were any UFOs. And sure enough, they showed up, these darting star-like objects. And she actually watched them for over an hour on at least one occasion. And again, they thought that was the extent of it, but it wasn't. This is when events started to really escalate. And it was just a few years later in 1987 when the oldest daughter, who I call Jenny, also started seeing UFOs, only this time it was directly over their home. Their home is located in Reseda, California, actually in the same town where I am right now, about 1, maybe 2 miles from here. This is located in the San Fernando Valley outside of Los Angeles. It's a very densely populated suburb. And Jenny was out driving one evening with her friends when she saw this star-like object, again, pretty high up there, but it was immediately obvious that this couldn't be a plane or anything conventional just by the way it was moving. And as Jenny says, I'll let her describe, she says, yeah, something I thought was a UFO, maybe up in the sky, something that didn't move like an airplane. It was just a light in the sky that moved in all different directions, and it was moving definitely too fast to be an airplane. It wasn't a plane. It moved back and forth in different directions so fast that it couldn't have been an airplane. And it was 1 year later when the youngest daughter, Kelly, who had seen UFOs probably more than anyone else in the family, became apparently the target of the Greys. Kelly, this was in October of 1986, Kelly woke up in her bedroom to see Greys surrounding her bed. She said there were several of them. She described them as being short, bald, with large dark eyes, and kind of grayish, leathery skin. And she was fully awake, and they told her, do not be afraid, come with us. Kelly protested. She says, I have a job, I have a family, I've got bills to pay. No. But next thing she knows, she found herself in a small, rounded room with gray walls. And these beings told her, we need to cut your arm. She said no. But they went ahead and cut her arm anyway, and then told her, we need to do an operation on your brain. This really freaked her out, naturally. And she said, no. And they started arguing about whether or not she would remember this. They told her, you cannot remember this. And she said, yes, I can. And they said, no, we're going to take your memory away. You will not remember this. And she said, yes, I will. And I'll just let Kelly describe a little bit of what she experienced. As she says, I just remember fighting with them, like trying to take me away, something like that. And she describes the room as, quote, like gray. It was like gray walls and a kind of rounded ceiling and a bunch of people trying to do something to my brain, and I was fighting them all the way. They were pulling on me, and I'm all, let me go, let me go. That morning, I had a scratch on my arm. I was really upset about it. The next day, she showed me her arm where the scratch was. It was already healing over. This was quite a scary experience for her. As she says, it was, quote, horrifying and scary. And she hoped that that was the end of it, but of course it wasn't. It was just 2 weeks later, on October 15th, 1987, that the ETs returned. Kelly was alone in her room when these lights showed up, and she described them as being little orb-like lights, and she felt like they were trying to enter into her brain. And they started communicating telepathically with her, and they said, you need to come with us. And again, she protested. told them why she couldn't go, that she has a job, she has friends, she has family, I have bills to pay. She felt like they were scanning her mind and recording her memories. And really the whole discussion was about whether or not she would remember. They said, "You won't remember," and she, of course, said she would. They told her, "We are going to take your memory away." And she said, "No, you're not. No, you're not. I'm going to tell." And they told her, "No, you're not." And she said, "Yes, I am." And she started swatting at these lights, grabbing them and sort of swatting them away. And she felt like they were draining out the thoughts of her head. And she threatened to tell her parents. And they said, "Your parents wouldn't understand. You better not tell them." And she threatened to tell her dad. And they said, "No, you will not remember this. When you wake up, you will not be able to speak." And Kelly suddenly woke up. She was still in a sitting position, swatting at these lights, which were no longer there. And she blurted out with a great effort of will, "Dad, are you all right?" She wasn't quite sure why she said that. That wasn't what she intended to say. But she was able to speak, and she was able to remember. I should say here that her father is in naval intelligence doing top secret work. He will not talk about what his job is. I don't know if there's a connection there or not, but for what it's worth, I thought I would mention that. And that was Kelly's second encounter with these Greys. And although she didn't see them face to face, it was obvious to her it was the same beings. And this completely freaked her out. She was fully awake. She was very much afraid of them coming back. So at this point, she started sleeping with the door open and the lights on. She had a lot of anxiety to the point that she didn't want to sleep in her own room. And she ended up sleeping often across the street at her boyfriend's house. And a few times they looked out the window and saw strange glowing lights in Kelly's bedroom. That happened at least twice. I interviewed her about it, and I called her up 2 weeks later to do a follow-up interview about it, and she had no memory of seeing these lights in her room from across the street. And not only that, she did not remember me interviewing her. I'm like, "Listen, I have you on tape." So that really freaked her out that she could forget something like that. But this is something we do see. There's a very strong amnesia aspect with some of these encounters. And it wasn't long before Kelly had a third encounter with these glowing lights. And this time it was a little bit more benevolent. They still argued about whether or not she would remember, but she had a real, honest-to-God conversation with them. This was on December 2nd, 1987. She woke up hearing her phone ding. And looking at her bedside, she was shocked to see that the phone was inside a paper bag. She did not put it in a paper bag. She could not explain that. And I should say that at this time, the Robinson family started having a lot of poltergeist-like activity, with doors opening and closing, knocking noises, objects disappearing. In fact, one time, Diane tried to get into Kelly's room. Kelly was not in her room at the time, and she couldn't open the door. And she had to get her husband, and they forced the door open. It turned out this really heavy dresser that Kelly had slid across the floor and blocked the door. So they have no idea how that could happen if there was nobody in the room. So lots of poltergeist activity, including apparitions. This was witnessed by all members of the family. So Kelly wakes up. She hears the phone dinging, looks and sees it's inside of a paper bag. And this is when these lights appear again. And she feels them trying to invade her brain, and they start speaking to her telepathically. And they started giving her information and talking to her. They asked her about people, about society, asking her strange questions that any normal person would know the answer to. And then they started giving her information about herself, predictions that were very personal. They gave her predictions about her job. It said that she would get a raise. They told her about her relationship with her boyfriend, that it was going very well. They told her about her relations with her friends at her church. So just started giving her all this information, which she found quite interesting, and that really intrigued her. But again, they argued quite a bit about whether or not she would remember. And they would say stuff like, "You're not going to remember this." And she said, "Yes, I am." And she would punch at these lights. They told her, "You're going to forget everything." And she said, "No, I'm not." And they said, "We're not going to let you remember this. We're going to take your memory of this away." And she said, "No, you're not." And then as quickly as the experience began, next thing she knows, she wakes up and they're gone. This was really quite alarming for her. And it was, her third experience with this. So she was really quite concerned about it. And she says it was very, very scary. But on the other hand, the fact that they were asking her all these questions about people and giving her this information made her feel like they weren't trying to harm her. And she doesn't think they're evil in any way. And as she says, "I think they're religious. They're not really out to hurt us. They're out to learn. But they're afraid for us to remember because they're afraid we would tell people about them. I don't talk to people about it because people think you're weird. I just hope you don't think I'm totally nuts, So that turned out to be her last experience. And she says, "I get scared because I really wish it was just my imagination. You know what I mean? I don't really want to believe in this stuff." And while that turned out to be her last experience, events were not over yet. In fact, they were about to come to a really dramatic climax. It was during this whole series of visitations that Kelly's mother, Diane, woke up one evening and found this weird needle-like scar or bruise on her arm. It was quite prominent, and it really concerned her. She and her husband talked about it. They couldn't figure out what this could possibly be. It was way too big for her to have just accidentally scratched herself or something like that. So she wasn't sure what to think of it. That's when her daughter said that she was having all these experiences, and she wondered if it was related to that. And then it was shortly after, just a few days after her daughter's last encounter with these weird lights, that Diane had what she calls a dream. She makes it clear that this was not a normal dream. She actually doesn't think it was a dream at all because it was just so bizarre. And she was awake in the dream. And what she experienced is really interesting and fits exactly in with what we hear a lot in other cases. Diane described finding herself in a small, rounded room, very clean, very hospital-like, she says, and very sterile. She said it had rounded walls that were sort of a pastel blue in color. There was a human-looking woman who was wearing what appeared to be like a doctor's coat, a white coat. And in the center of this room was a very strange device, sort of shaped like a Christmas tree. It was quite tall, and it had all these cylinders around it, attached to the center of it. And when Diane stepped forward to look inside these cylinders, she got a real shock because it turned out they were incubators, and inside each one of these cylinders was what appeared to be a baby. And this was quite a involved experience, and Diane started to talk with this human-looking figure. And this human-looking figure told her to pick a baby. And Diane said, "No, I don't want a baby. I have grown kids. What am I going to do with a baby?" And the lady said, well, we want you to hold a baby. And Diane said, no, I don't know what to do with a baby, and these babies need help. And the lady said, well, we're giving them help. Diane said, well, okay, if you're taking care of them, then I don't need to take one. And the lady said, we're taking good care of them. They have everything but love. That's why I'd like you to take one and love it. And Diane said, well, I would like to, but I can't. And she believes that the ET, or this figure, I should say, told her to take one home. And she says, no, I can't. I have no place for a baby. I love babies, but and I would love to love them all, but I cannot take them home. I can't help you. I can't give them love. And the lady was very understanding and said, you feel sad because you can't do this. And Diane said, no, I feel sad because you say they need love. And in my whole life, I think the greatest thing on earth is not money or anything but love. And you make me very sad because I can't give them love. It's physically impossible for me to take them. And the lady said, well, these babies have problems. They're different. But these babies still need love. And Diane said, I know, but there's absolutely no way I can do this. And she described this sort of device, this incubator machine, as being cylindrical. And I'll just let her describe it in her own words. She says, that strange room and this lady, she was strange too because I didn't know her. I didn't know who the heck she was. And there was this round cylinder type thing that turned around and around. There were all these babies in little compartments, like in enclosures. It was almost the shape of a Christmas tree, narrow at the top, and it came down in all these little compartments. And she would press a button, and it would move around, so you would see all these babies. And then she'd press another button, and it would move around again. And she said, these babies, there was something wrong with every one of them. And the lady told her it wasn't supposed to be this way. And Diane described the room, and I quote, the room was strange. It was like nothing I've ever seen before. Not walls like we know. The walls were kind of rounded. It was not a regular room. It was blue, like a pastel. And then that container or the cylinder or whatever the heck it was that these babies were in. All these controlled compartments. You could see them, and they looked fine. They looked healthy. They were squirming around and everything. But there was some of them definitely looked deformed and unusual. And she wasn't quite ready to say they looked alien or not, but she also said that they didn't look entirely human either. But she said this room was not very big, not a big room at all. A strange room and well lighted. It had no corners, not like regular walls. And the lady told her that it was not planned this way, that they had all these things wrong with them. They were well taken care of and well fed. And she said they have everything but love. So this is a common theme we see in a lot of these cases. This is really all Diane remembers. She woke up the next morning quite upset. She told me about this, and she had no idea that other people were reporting very similar events. This is what UFO investigators call a baby presentation. And it's not at all unusual for people, contactees, to be handed these babies and told to nurture them and love them. And that appears to be what's happening in this case. It was just a year or two later that Bud Hopkins came out with his book, Intruders, which really sort of established that this is something that does happen to a lot of contactees. And following this, quote, dream, the Robinson family stopped having UFO encounters. That was it. Their encounters had started with sightings, moved directly to bedroom visitations, face-to-face encounters, and onboard experiences, and culminated in this baby presentation. And that was it. I did present this case in my early book, 1 in 40, The UFO Epidemic. And I like this case for several reasons. Again, because it shows how a series of encounters has a pattern, starting with sightings and moving on all the way to full-on encounters and onboard experiences and a baby presentation. And this illustrates, I think, one of the main ET agendas with the Greys to produce hybrid babies. And it also shows how a case can start out quite scary, but is ultimately benevolent. And both Kelly and Diane, who are really the main witnesses in this case, do not feel that these beings were evil. They were just curious and very interested in human society. So yeah, it's a very interesting case. It really was quite difficult for Kelly in particular to experience. And she was glad when it ended. Diane was also very much moved by the experience that she had with this, quote, dream. So yeah, it's a very interesting encounter, and that's why I wanted to present it to you today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I really appreciate you watching. And until next time, keep asking questions, keep searching for answers, and most importantly, keep having fun.